When trapped on a military base, soldiers are forced to face their enemies without resources and no connection to the outside world.
No one's coming. Not ours, or theirs.
It's the year 2063, and due to human activities, most of the planet is submerged underwater. Only 2 continents have survived, and the war for land and resources continues relentlessly. In the middle of the sea, between the 2 continents, lies the military base Sentinel, where a platoon of 4 soldiers is stationed. Their 2-year contract ended 3 months ago, and their food supplies are rapidly running out. However, their command is unresponsive and hasn't sent any replacements. After a successful fishing trip, Cassidy and Sullivan attempt to pull in their catch, but the weather deteriorates rapidly. The platoon sergeant, Hendricks, detects an approaching powerful storm and instructs Baines to secure the generator. However, the waves intensify, and Baines notices a pipe leak. He rushes to the pipes to fix them, but his hand gets stuck between them. Water quickly floods the area, but luckily, Baines manages to free himself in time. Meanwhile, Cassidy and Sullivan are forced to abandon their catch to escape a massive wave that's already crashing over the base. The next day, the team assesses the damages to the outpost and realizes they must use their remaining resources even more sparingly. Sullivan hands out military rations for breakfast and informs them that they lost their catch. Baines is frustrated because they only have 1 chance per month to gather fresh food. He accuses Sullivan of not simply casting the net and waiting for the storm to drive fish into it. A dispute arises between the soldiers. Sullivan is unhappy that Baines took parts from the kitchen for pipe repair, but Baines reminds him that it's thanks to him that there's water back at the base. Hendricks assigns Baines to prepare a report on the damages. An agitated Baines states that, in addition to the broken and rusted equipment, they also have a 3.4-degree roll.
In other words, we're fucked.
However, the unflappable sergeant is convinced that Baines will fix everything. Anger overwhelms the soldier, and he wants to request the arrival time of the second crew, but he remembers it's impossible since the satellite is only meant for reports, so they'll have to stay in the dark. After a while, Sullivan uses the telegraph to submit the daily report and notes that there have been no incidents in the last 24 hours. He also records this information in the journal. He then goes to the observation deck and asks Hendricks if he has ever seen people from the other continent. The sergeant doesn't respond and changes the subject, demanding to remove the wind dancer from the deck. Sullivan takes the binoculars and looks into the distance when he suddenly notices something unusual. He immediately calls Hendricks. The sergeant instructs Cassidy to check the radar, and they confirm that a ship is approaching. Sullivan is thrilled, thinking it's the second crew they've all been waiting for, but Hendricks orders him to prepare the munitions.
The gun. Sarge, that's the relief.
We don't know that.
Cassidy tries to communicate with the ship but receives no response. Alarmed, Baines and Sullivan prepare to launch the munitions, even though they don't believe it's the enemy. With the newcomer's silence raising concerns, Hendricks hands Sullivan a pistol and instructs him to take a boat and approach the ship. Soon, he reaches the rusty abandoned vessel named Aurora and calls out to the crew. No one answers, and Sullivan carefully boards. While inspecting the ship, he notices a lot of dirty dishes, scattered items, food supplies, and barrels of iodine. Meanwhile, Hendricks tries to contact Sullivan, but he ignores the radio signals. The sergeant believes that Sullivan has been attacked and plans to destroy the enemy ship. He demands the key from Cassidy, which activates the weapon, but she asks him not to rush, hoping for Sullivan's return. Hendricks then calls Sullivan one last time, and finally, he gets in touch and reports that the ship is clear. The attack is called off, and Cassidy asks the sergeant to return her the key, but he keeps both keys with him due to her refusal to follow the protocol immediately.
Fucking lunatic.
Hendricks sets off to investigate the towed ship at Sentinel, while Sullivan and Cassidy are left alone, relaxing in each other's arms after a tough day. A couple of hours later, the team takes an iodine bath to reduce the impact of radiation. Baines is convinced that there was a second crew on the Aurora, and Sullivan suggests reporting it to the command. However, Hendricks forbids reporting the incident until they have more data.
An empty boat turns up that's meant to be our relief. Is that not a fucking event?
Suddenly, Sullivan notices that the sergeant now has both keys and asks Cassidy to explain how that happened. Then Baines restores the power on the Aurora, and Hendricks studies the ship's route, jotting down all the coordinates, which he later marks on the map. Meanwhile, Sullivan reflects on what the world was like before the catastrophe, while Cassidy believes that such conversations are pointless and wants to leave the past in the past.
The only way to unfuck the world is to wipe out the humans.
Then Sullivan asks Cassidy what she'll do when she gets back home and admits that he did send a message about the incident to the command, which means they will soon find out what happened. The next morning, Hendricks notices his soldiers at the telegraph, and Baines informs him that Sullivan sent a request to the command. The sergeant reminds them that they lack enough information, but what if the team gets a response? However, a few minutes later, the soldiers' hopes are shattered once again. They receive a response stating that there have been no incidents. Additionally, they get back the message Sullivan sent the previous evening. That's when they realize in horror that they have lost contact with the command long ago. Hendricks doesn't explain anything to the team and orders everyone back to their posts. Soon, Baines comes up with a plan and, taking tools, sneaks onto the ship. However, during the night, Sullivan notices his return and demands an explanation, but Baines brushes him off. Sullivan plans to leave, but suddenly, Baines produces a bottle of alcohol and suggests they drink. They discuss the enemies from the other continent whom no one has seen in a long time and speculate that they may no longer exist.
They use the threat of danger to keep us in line.
They also discuss the nuclear bomb at their base, which could destroy the remaining world. Furthermore, both keys to it are now in Hendricks' possession, and his behavior has become unpredictable. Suddenly, Baines announces that he might soon repair the Aurora, meaning they could escape. Inspired, Sullivan wakes up Cassidy to share this news. He assures her that they can reach one of the surviving cities and start a new life there. However, Cassidy believes that Hendricks won't let them go and doesn't believe in the success of the plan. The next day, Sullivan and Baines head to the Aurora, and Baines manages to start the engine.
Excellent work.
However, the team's plans are shattered because Hendricks orders them to dismantle the boat for parts that they can use to repair the Sentinel. Sullivan tries to persuade the sergeant that they have only one chance, and if they leave before tomorrow, they can bypass the storm. He seeks support from Cassidy, but she remains silent. Then, threatening with a gun, Hendricks orders the team to start repairs immediately. However, Sullivan is determined to leave the base as soon as possible. Cassidy approaches the sergeant and tries to change his mind, but he has no intention of allowing his squad to leave their post. Meanwhile, Sullivan and Baines devise a new escape plan and think about how to ensure that the sergeant doesn't interfere with their plans. Suddenly, Hendricks interrupts their conversation and suggests they have a drink. Cassidy joins them, and the sergeant presents his plan. He states that Cassidy's proposal suits him. 2 members of the team will take the boat to send a report home, and Cassidy will stay with him at the post. Sullivan is deeply disappointed by this decision, as he wanted to go home with his girlfriend. Later, they have a private conversation, and he convinces her to defy Hendricks.
We're soldiers.
I'll stop being a fucking soldier for 1 minute.
Sullivan suggests that she not sacrifice herself and go in his place or stay at the base together. However, Cassidy, tired of Sullivan's persuasion, erupts and tells him that she doesn't love him and that what they had between them was just a human need. A shocked Sullivan silently leaves, and Cassidy can't hold back her tears. After a while, the soldiers gather their belongings, and Hendricks gives Sullivan a letter he must deliver to the command. The sergeant also remembers Sullivan's recent question about people from the other continent and remarks that their enemies are just like them and also want the war to end. Sullivan once again offers to leave with Hendricks, but he refuses, stating that he needs to watch over the bomb. Then the sergeant returns to his work and continues plotting the ship's route on the map. Suddenly, he notices that the Aurora intentionally changed course and bypassed the Sentinel. Hendricks becomes suspicious and starts to suspect Cassidy, but she doesn't confess to anything. Early in the morning, the team wakes up to the sound of an alarm. A new ship appears on the radar, and Hendricks orders them to take their positions and load the weapon. Cassidy tries to contact the ship again, but once more, there's no response. Hendricks orders to open fire, refusing to send soldiers for reconnaissance. Baines obeys but misses. Suddenly, Cassidy notices that the Aurora is missing, and Sullivan and Baines realize that they are targeting their own ship. They refuse to fire again, but then Hendricks pulls out a pistol. Baines tries to reason with him but gets a blow to the head. The sergeant forces Sullivan to destroy the ship, and to intimidate them, he shoots the Wind Dancer. However, Baines is not willing to follow the command, and Hendricks wounds him in the ear. The sergeant threatens to shoot him if he doesn't obey, but at that moment, Sullivan destroys the ship, saving his friend's life. An enraged Baines wants to attack Hendricks, but then Sullivan and Cassidy lock Hendricks in a pantry, and Cassidy takes both bomb activation keys from him. A shocked Baines wants to finish off the sergeant, but Sullivan stops him, for which he receives a blow from his comrade. Cassidy tries to calm them down, and the disappointed soldiers disperse to their rooms, where they unpack their belongings. After some time, Cassidy suggests extending the shifts until Hendricks recovers, but a desperate Baines forbids his release and then announces that he is leaving. Sullivan decides to scan all channels for communication with the command.
There's 1,000 channels. We'll be out of for 3
Yeah,
years.
we're not exactly going anywhere.
Cassidy suddenly confesses that she really wanted him to sail home without worrying about her, and asks not to be upset by her words, but Sullivan is not pacified by this. Then Sullivan brings food to Hendricks and asks why he changed his mind. The sergeant tells him that the boat was here 3 months ago, but for some reason, it changed course, and soon its engine broke down, and it started drifting. It becomes obvious that there is a traitor among them, which is why Hendricks didn't allow them to leave. The sergeant asks to be released, but Sullivan doesn't believe him and leaves. The soldier continues to go through the telegraph channels, but no one responds. Baines is still drinking a lot and working in his workshop, trying to distract himself from negative thoughts, but suddenly he loses his temper and wrecks the room. In the evening, Cassidy shows Sullivan her childhood photo, where she is depicted with her parents and brother during the rain. She tells that none of them survived because of an enemy raid. Sullivan says he hardly remembers anything from his childhood, except that there was unbearable heat and drought all the time. The next morning, Baines finds Cassidy in the communication room and suddenly attacks her. The girl manages to fend him off, but she doesn't notice that Baines has taken the keys from her neck. Cassidy runs to Sullivan and tells him what happened, but he believes that Baines just needs to sober up. Suddenly, Baines' voice comes through the speakers, and they realize he is preparing to activate a nuclear bomb. Sullivan and Cassidy rush to stop him, reminding him of his family. Baines, in tears, gives up his plan, but then admits that he just forgot the last digit of the activation code. Cassidy takes back the keys, and Sullivan decides to release Hendricks, but Baines informs them that he's already gone. He explains that he wanted to kill the sergeant, but when he entered the storage room, he saw that he had taken his own life. Cassidy and Sullivan see the broken window in the storage room and understand that Baines is right. Grieving, Sullivan opens Hendricks' letter to the command and learns that the sergeant had requested an extension of his service. Then he goes to Hendricks' office and examines the map with the ship's route marked on it. Meanwhile, Cassidy informs them that in 3 hours, they will face another storm, and they need parts from the damaged ship. Baines, who has come to his senses after difficult days, volunteers to help and go out to sea with Cassidy. He explains his strange behavior to Sullivan and reveals that his wife was pregnant when he left, and now he doesn't even know if it's a son or a daughter. Sullivan understands his struggles and they reconcile. Then Baines heads to the boat, and Sullivan, just in case, hands Cassidy a pistol. Alone at the base, Sullivan decides to go fishing, and suddenly, in horror, he discovers a gunshot wound on his head and realizes that someone has shot the sergeant, meaning there is indeed a traitor among them. Sullivan checks the personnel files of the squad members, and then, looking at the map again, has a revelation. He confirms that the lighthouse on Sentinel is detachable, making it easy to move to the boat and force the ship to change course. It turns out that someone from their team infiltrated the Aurora and destroyed the entire crew. Meanwhile, Cassidy returns, tears in her eyes, and reports that Baines drowned in an accident. Sullivan doesn't admit that he now knows about her betrayal and ponders what to do next. The next day, Cassidy wakes up alone and sets out to search for Sullivan. Suddenly, he contacts her on the radio and says that he knows everything. She continues to pretend that she doesn't understand, but then notices that Sullivan is ready to activate the bomb. Finally, she tells him the truth and claims that if she doesn't seize the nuclear bomb and destroy their enemies, her homeland will be underwater. But Sullivan is convinced that no one should possess this weapon. There are only seconds left before the explosion. Sullivan prepares for the end, but nothing happens, and Baines' favorite phrase appears on the screen. Cassidy and Sullivan realize that Baines reprogrammed the system to prevent the world from being completely destroyed. They reconcile and are now ready to protect cats, horses, and swallows from both Cassidy's people and Sullivan's people, staying on Sentinel for as long as necessary. Will the heroes be able to prevent a nuclear war? Will someone rescue them from the abandoned military base? Share your thoughts in the comments, like, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.